I'm Aurora, 36 years old, and less than a week ago, I stood alone at my husband Daniel's grave in a small cemetery in Tokyo. This trip was never part of any plan we had. It began with a headache Daniel said was just a little fatigue from overworking. I never imagined that would be the start of the greatest tragedy of my life. Daniel was a software engineer, the kind of man who could spend an entire evening tinkering with a piece of code just because it didn't look perfect enough. He was offered a 6-month position at a leading tech company in Japan. We discussed it endlessly and finally decided he would go 3 months ahead, and I would join him later to experience a slice of life abroad together. I still remember the night before his flight. Warm golden lights, a dinner table set for two, his hand holding mine, smiling and saying, "I'll be back before you know it." The first 3 months passed peacefully. We video called every night. He showed me the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, the ramen shops he swore I'd absolutely love. Last Christmas I stayed with him for 3 weeks. We traveled through Kyoto and Osaka, took hundreds of photos and talked about having a child after his contract ended. I thought that would be the next chapter of my life. Then one morning while I was in Seattle, Daniel video called earlier than usual. His face was tense, hand rubbing his temple. "Probably just a project deadline, don't worry," he said, voice weary. 8 hours later I got a call from one of his coworkers. The man's voice trembled. Daniel collapsed in the conference room. They're rushing him to the ER. I booked the earliest flight available, more than 20 hours in the air. When I arrived at the hospital, Daniel was already in a deep coma. The doctor said it was a massive brain hemorrhage. They had operated, but the damage was too severe. I sat by his bed for 5 days, holding his hand, telling him about our house in Seattle, about the rose garden he promised to fix the fence for. Not once did he open his eyes. He passed away at 39. I called my family back in the US. My voice cracked from exhaustion and despair. My mother said, "You should consider cremation and bringing the ashes back. It's too expensive to transport the body." My younger brother claimed he was too busy with work. No one offered to fly over. I handled everything alone, from the death certificate to the burial permit, to contacting the cemetery. The language barrier was huge. Every conversation with hospital staff or government offices required translation apps or a tired interpreter. The funeral was rushed. Just a few of Daniel's colleagues, a few foreign friends he had met while working there, and me. No family, no lifelong friends from home. I placed a bouquet of white flowers on his grave with my own hands, in a foreign city, cold and silent. The emptiness was so overwhelming I couldn't even cry. Our savings drained quickly. Insurance covered only a small portion because international contracts always have restrictions I had never noticed. I had to use credit cards and dip into my own emergency funds to pay for everything. Every night in the temporary apartment, I'd see Daniel's suitcase still open, filled with the dress shirts he loved to wear to work. His scent still lingered, but it choked me instead of comforting me. I kept updating my family, though their responses were short. "Stay strong, we're praying for you," then quickly moving on to other topics. I had hoped this loss would change them, make them want to be by my side, but it was an empty hope. The day I signed the burial papers, Tokyo's rain poured heavily. I stood alone under a hotel-loaned umbrella, watching the casket lowered into the ground, my heart hollow. No hand reached for mine, no voice called my name to remind me I wasn't alone. In that moment I understood one thing with absolute clarity. From now on I would have to face everything on my own. My flight from Tokyo to Seattle lasted nearly 12 hours, but it was only part of a 30-plus hour stretch of non-stop travel, layovers, gate changes, and sheer exhaustion. By the time I landed in Los Angeles for my connection, I had been awake for almost 2 days. My eyes burned as if filled with sand, my head felt unbearably heavy, and every sound around me seemed to echo from far away. Before my flight from LA took off, I pulled out my phone and sent a message to our family group chat. "My plane lands in Seattle at 5 p.m. Can anyone pick me up?" The scene notification popped up almost immediately, but it took a few minutes before anyone replied. Ethan, my younger brother, finally responded, "We're busy, just call an Uber." I read it twice, thinking I might have misunderstood. But no, the words were as cold as they looked. A moment later my mother added, "You should have planned ahead. Can't just call last minute like that." I stared at the screen, swallowing down the lump of anger in my throat. I had been in Tokyo for over a week, handling my husband's funeral alone, barely sleeping, and now, back on US soil, I was treated like some inconvenience. My fingers trembled as I typed back, "It's fine." Then I shut off the screen and leaned my head against the airplane seat. There was nothing more to say. I knew I'd get nothing but more passive-aggressive remarks or silence. When the plane touched down in Seattle, twilight had already settled in. The terminal was packed, and each step I took felt heavier as I dragged 3 suitcases. One mine, 2 Daniel's. One of them carried what I'd brought back from Tokyo: his work shirts, the leather-bound journal I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, and a few small items he loved. I stood near the exit, watching other passengers greet family with hugs, take their bags, and chatter excitedly. The sight made me feel cold from the inside out. I opened the rideshare app. Peak hour prices, $82. I took a breath and tapped book. While waiting, I rolled my suitcases outside. February wind stung my face, but it was less suffocating than the terminal air. Minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. The driver, Paul, mid-50s according to his badge, helped load my bags into the trunk and asked gently, "Long trip?" I gave a faint smile. "Yeah, over 30 hours. Paul nodded, said nothing more, and turned on soft jazz. I couldn't tell a stranger that the trip ended with burying my husband in a foreign country, and that my own family hadn't been there for me, not even in the final moments. The drive through my neighborhood felt both familiar and foreign. As the car pulled onto my street, I noticed my house was completely dark. No lights on, no warmth waiting. I had texted my mother earlier, asking her to turn on the heat, knowing Seattle was in the middle of an unusual cold snap. Clearly no one had bothered. Paul set my bags by the front porch. As I fumbled for my keys, he hesitated and asked, "You gonna be okay?" "I'm fine, thanks," I replied quickly. But the moment I opened the door, I knew I wasn't fine at all. A rush of cold air hit me in the face, sharp as a warning. The house was silent, the sound of the lock turning echoing through the empty living room. The stale, musty smell was overwhelming. I flipped on the light. Bulbs flickered before they finally glowed. The mail pile by the door was overflowing, envelopes spilling onto the floor. Clearly, no one had picked it up despite Ethan saying, "I'll handle it." I tried turning on the heat, but the system groaned and died. The chill clung to everything. Still in my coat, I pushed Daniel's suitcase against the wall, unable to bring myself to open it. In the kitchen, the fridge was bare except for a few jars of condiments and a carton of milk long past its expiration date. I sat at the table, swallowing the familiar taste of abandonment. I had imagined that coming back to the US, I'd at least have my family close. Instead, I was met with a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan, "Home yet?" "In a meeting, we'll text later." I didn't answer. Outside, a light rain had started, drops tracing paths down the window. For a moment, I thought about calling someone, anyone, but my contact list was nearly empty except for a few close friends living far away. I didn't want to burden them, not on a cold, rainy night like this. I climbed the stairs to the bedroom. Everything looked just as it had before I left for Tokyo, yet it felt unbearably empty. The queen-sized bed now held only me. I sat on the edge, my hands resting on Daniel's suitcase, a quiet dread rising in my chest, the fear that this was only the beginning of a long, lonely road ahead. I woke up the next morning to the steady sound of dripping somewhere downstairs. My head still felt heavy from exhaustion, but the icy chill in the air jolted me upright. The house felt like a block of ice, my breath visible in thin white clouds. Walking down the stairs, I realized the dripping had turned into a faint trickle. The smell of dampness mixed with a metallic tang made my heart race. When I entered the kitchen, the sight before me froze me in place. A wide water stain spread across the floor, and from the ceiling thin streams of freezing water dripped down, pooling into a steady flow. I rushed to the light switch, but the bulb only flickered before going out completely. The sense of danger hit instantly. Water had already reached the dining area, seeping toward an electrical outlet near the floor. I knew if I didn't shut off the water, the damage would be severe. I ran to the cabinet where the main valve was, my hands so stiff from the cold that I had to force the handle to turn. The water finally stopped, but the house was already engulfed in damp, icy air, with a thin sheet of water across the floors. The wind howled outside, signaling the incoming blizzard. I shuddered, remembering the weather forecast before my flight home. Temperatures dropping to 23 degrees Fahrenheit, strong winds, and heavy snow for the next 48 hours. Without heat, the house would turn into a freezer within hours. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan first. After a few rings, he answered, his voice carrying the clatter of dishes and laughter somewhere in the background. "What's up, Aurora? My house is flooding. I think the pipes burst. The heat's out too. Can I stay with you for a few days?" There was a short pause, then Ethan sighed. "We've got guests over today and the spare room's full of Lisa's stuff. Probably not a good time. You should get a hotel." I bit my lip, keeping my voice even. "I could, but there's a blizzard outside. Roads might be closed." Ethan hesitated. "You're a grown woman. You'll figure it out." I hung up before I started crying. Then I called my mom. She picked up after 2 rings, the sound of TV and clinking glassware in the background. "You're back already? Why didn't you let us know?" I posted in the family group. "My house has a burst pipe, no heat, it's freezing. Can I stay with you and Dad?" She hesitated. "You know tomorrow's the gathering for your dad's friends. The house is a mess from all the prep. And your dad's back has been acting up lately. It's just not a good time." I stayed silent for a few seconds before saying quietly, "I understand." After ending the call, I sat in the chair near the kitchen door, the cold seeping deep into my bones. The water on the floor had soaked every rug. Every step I took came with a wet squish, a reminder that I was completely alone in handling this disaster. I tried to find something to eat in the pantry but only saw a few expired packs of instant noodles. I thought of boiling water, but the electric stove blinked once and died, signaling power trouble. I layered on more clothes, wrapped a scarf tightly, and tried to keep the warmth in. Outside, the wind picked up, whipping snow into swirling white clouds. Each gust howled like it could slice through my ears. I knew if I stayed in the house overnight in these conditions, I might not make it. I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Rachel, an old coworker, but she lived in Tacoma, over 50 miles away. In a storm like this, the roads would be deadly. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Just hang in there until the storm passes. Don't make a big deal out of it. We don't want the neighbors to find out." I stared at the words, feeling like I'd been hit with something colder than the weather outside. Not a single question about whether I was safe. Only worry about what others might think. I leaned back in the chair, staring up at the ceiling still stained with damp blotches, and wondered, how much more strength did I have left to keep carrying all of this? I knew if I wanted to survive the night, I had to either restore the heating system or check the electricity so I could turn on the space heater. The water flooding the floor was getting colder, clinging to my toes like ice. I threw on a thick coat, grabbed a flashlight, and headed down to the basement to check the breaker panel. The wooden steps were slick with moisture. With every step, the cold from below crept up my legs, making me shiver. The flashlight beam caught a pool of murky water spreading at the foot of the stairs. I hesitated for a moment but knew if I didn't try, I might freeze to death tonight. The water reached my ankles as I stepped onto the basement floor. The breaker panel was on the far wall, next to the main water line. I moved carefully, trying to keep my balance, but the concrete floor was as slick as if it had been oiled. Just as I touched the panel door, a sharp jolt of electricity shot straight into my right arm. I heard a dry pop, then felt like a sledgehammer slammed into my body. The shock flung me backward and I hit my head against the edge of a metal shelf. A loud clang rang out, followed by a stabbing pain spreading through my temple. I lay motionless in the icy water, dizziness wrapping around me. My ears rang, my vision blurred. When I touched my head, my fingers came away wet and warm, blood. I tried to sit up, but the whole room tilted. It took everything I had to crawl toward the stairs, but halfway up my strength gave out. I sat, leaning against the wall, my head on my knees, consciousness slipping. A shrill beeping cut through the haze. At first I thought it was in my head from the impact, but then realized it was the carbon monoxide alarm by the kitchen. I opened my eyes, catching a faint metallic smell mixed with something burnt. The broken heating system must have been leaking CO. I knew I had to get out, but my body wouldn't obey. My phone was somewhere in the living room, only a few yards away, yet it felt like miles. A crushing wave of sleep hit me like something was pulling me into deep water. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. If I slept now, at least I wouldn't feel the cold anymore. I saw Daniel's face, smiling, hand outstretched, whispering, "It's okay, love. Sudden pounding on the door shattered the image. A woman's voice, panicked, called from outside, "Aurora. Are you in there?" I wanted to answer, but my throat was dry, producing only a faint sound. The banging grew louder, followed by urgent shouts and a voice on the phone. "Emergency. House across the street has a CO alarm going off and water pouring out the door." Moments later, the door burst open. 2 firefighters rushed in, lifting me from the couch. I heard one of them say quickly, "She's ice cold, weak pulse, head injury. Get her to the truck now." Cold wind hit my face as they carried me outside, but it wasn't as deadly as the chill inside. Through the blur, I saw a thin, middle-aged woman in a red wool scarf, Mrs. Collins, my neighbor across the street. Her face was tense, but her eyes were filled with concern. I was placed on a stretcher and loaded into the ambulance. The doors shut, the siren wailed. In the flashing blue and red lights, I heard the EMT's voice. "Hypothermia, head trauma, possible CO poisoning. Get oxygen on her." A mask was pressed over my nose and mouth, the warm rush of clean air making me cough. A young nurse held my hand and said slowly, "Keep your eyes open, Aurora. We've got you." I nodded faintly, tears welling up. Not from pain, but because a stranger had spoken my name with genuine care, something my own family hadn't done in days. The vehicle rattled as it turned onto the main road. I closed my eyes, letting the steady beep of the heart monitor wash over me, telling myself I had just escaped a silent death. I woke up in a stark white hospital room, fluorescent lights casting a haze over everything. My head still throbbed and my right hand ached from the electric shock. Beside me, a blonde nurse with a badge that read Megan was checking my blood pressure. "You're lucky, Aurora. A few more hours and things would have been much worse, both from hypothermia and carbon monoxide poisoning," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. I only nodded, unable to find words. Just last night I thought it would all end in that freezing house. When Megan left, a man in a blue shirt walked in, introducing himself as Michael Turner, a reporter for the local news. He said he'd heard from the fire department about a widow, recently returned from abroad, who had narrowly escaped death at home. "It's too important a story to overlook," he said. I was about to decline, but Michael added, "We want to highlight the real dangers people face without proper support systems, especially during blizzards." I agreed to share my story, telling him I didn't want to go too deep into Daniel. But when he asked to look at my phone to understand the timeline, the screen was still open to the last family group chat, Ethan telling me to call an Uber, and my mother scolding me for not planning ahead. He stayed silent for a long moment, then asked, "Aurora, may I screenshot this?" I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to expose my family, but another part thought, they had left me alone in the most dangerous moment of my life. In the end, I nodded. That night's news showed footage of my front door broken open for rescue, an ambulance parked outside in the snow, and an interview with Mrs. Collins, the neighbor who found me. I saw water running out of the door and heard the CO alarm. I kept calling but no answer. "I can't believe Aurora had just come back from her husband's funeral and had to go through this alone," she said. Then the screen showed the screenshot of the messages. No extra commentary, just the reporter reading them aloud. "Aurora. My flight lands at 5 p.m. Can anyone pick me up? Ethan. We're busy, call an Uber. Mom. You should have planned ahead." The segment ended with Michael saying, "While her family refused to help, the community has begun to speak out." By that night, the hashtag no worries, mocking the no worries reply I'd once sent, spread across local social media. Dozens shared their own stories of being abandoned by family in tough times. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Strangers sent words of encouragement. Business owners offered to help repair my home. A downtown Seattle hotel offered me free lodging until my house was fixed. But along with that came a flood of messages from my family. Ethan texted, "Aurora, I just saw the news." "Who posted that chat?" "This is private." Before I could reply, my mom called, her voice frantic, not out of worry for me but for the family's image. "Do you realize they're making the whole family look bad? My friends have been texting me." "What did you tell them?" I answered calmly, "I just told the truth. If the truth makes someone look bad, that's not my problem." She paused for a few seconds, then softened her tone. "Come stay at our place for now so people see the family is united." I knew this wasn't genuine concern, just an attempt to patch up appearances. I said I'd think about it and hung up. That afternoon, I turned on the TV and saw my house with water flooding the porch, interviews with firefighters, and a clip of Mrs. Collins saying she and some neighbors would help clean up. Comments poured in, many praising the community and sharing the story as a warning about shallow family ties. A strange feeling filled my chest. I had never received this much care and support from strangers before. The hospital room door swung open the next morning. The first to step in was Ethan, his face pale, phone still in hand. Behind him came my mother, Linda, in a beige turtleneck sweater with her hair neatly tied back, and my father, Martin, wearing the kind of expression you'd expect in a board meeting, not while visiting a daughter who had just survived a near-death experience. Ethan spoke first, his voice urgent. "Aurora, I just saw last night's news. They made it sound like the whole family abandoned you. That's completely misleading." My mother jumped in, her voice slightly shaky but still holding that superior tone. "Do you know how many people messaged me? My badminton group, the church ladies. Everyone asking why you'd put private family matters in the news. Our family doesn't need to be shamed like this." I leaned back against my pillow and replied calmly. "I didn't put anything in the news. They published the truth. And the truth doesn't need editing to look better." My father stayed silent, standing by the window. When I glanced his way, his eyes flicked to me for just a second before turning back to the snowy view outside. Parker, my attending physician, walked in with my chart. After a quick check of my vitals, he said, "Aurora still needs 2 more days of rest and monitoring. Once discharged, she must stay somewhere warm, with someone present for at least 48 hours and avoid any stress." My mother seized the opportunity immediately. "We'll take her home. Family sticks together in hard times." I let out a small laugh, though it made the ache in my temples spike. "Family sticks together? Are you sure you want me to go over the past week?" Ethan frowned. "You're exaggerating. We've all been busy. We can't just drop everything for a flight or a broken pipe." I looked him straight in the eye. "When I told you Daniel died, you said I should consider cremation because it's cheaper. When I texted asking for a ride from the airport, you told me to get an Uber. When I called about the burst pipe, you said I was a grown woman and should handle it. Is that being busy? Or just being indifferent?" Linda drew in a sharp breath, her voice rising. "You're insulting your family. We care, we just have different priorities." I didn't look away from her. "Different priorities? You prioritized a social gathering over your daughter's safety in a snowstorm. Dad stayed silent when I nearly died from carbon monoxide poisoning. So excuse me if I prioritize my peace of mind over the perfect family image you're trying to protect." The room went quiet except for the faint tap of Dr. Parker's pen against the clipboard. Martin finally turned, speaking in a low voice. "You're letting emotions get the best of you. Don't forget we're still family." I answered slowly, clearly. "I haven't forgotten. But being family doesn't mean I have to give you another chance to hurt me." Parker set my chart down and looked directly at me. "Aurora, you have the right to choose where you recover. The decision is yours." I nodded. "I won't be going to my parents' house. I've accepted an offer to stay at a hotel provided by the community. There I'll be cared for and have peace." Ethan shot to his feet. "You'd really choose strangers over your own family?" I met his gaze without blinking. "You're right, they are strangers. But they showed up when I needed them. Family didn't." Linda's grip tightened on her handbag, her lips pressed into a thin line. "When you're thinking clearly, you'll realize this is a mistake." I sighed. "When I'm thinking clearly, I'll be even more certain it's the right choice." Parker motioned for the nurse to escort everyone out so I could rest. Before leaving, Martin paused at the door. I thought he might say something, but he only gave a small nod and followed my mother and brother out. When the door clicked shut, I sank back into my pillow. It wasn't relief exactly, but for the first time in years, I felt I had stood firmly on my own side. And I knew, once I left this hospital, there was no going back to the way things were. 3 days later, I left the hospital wearing thick clothes borrowed from the charity room. Outside, Seattle's sky was still heavy and gray, but the snowstorm had passed. A Riverview Hotel SUV was waiting at the entrance, the driver holding a sign with my name. When the door closed, I leaned back in the seat, feeling for the first time that I was being taken somewhere without needing anyone's permission or negotiation. The hotel sat by the river, my room on the 8th floor with a wide window looking straight at the slow-moving water. When the staff opened the door, the scent of fresh bed linens drifted out. Inside was a gift basket with a handwritten card. "Welcome, Aurora. We're here to help you heal." Below it was a mini fridge stocked with fresh food, a few frozen hot soups and fruit juice. The next day, the Northwest Restoration's repair team met me at the hotel. Their representative, Mark, brought photos of my home. Water still pooled in the basement, damp stains creeping across the kitchen walls. He explained the repair plan in detail. Dehumidifying, replacing the main pipe, installing a new heating system and adding freeze protection to the water lines. All costs would be covered by a community fund raised from my story. That evening, Mrs. Collins, the woman who had saved me, visited. She brought cinnamon cookies and a slip of paper with the address of a community grief support group. "They meet every Tuesday and Thursday," she said. "You don't have to share. You can just listen." I hesitated, but that night, unable to sleep, my mind kept replaying images of Daniel and the cold, dark house. On Tuesday morning, I went to the community center. The meeting room was small, about a dozen people sitting in a circle, led by an older woman named Ellen. When it was my turn, my voice trembled at first, but the words poured out. Losing Daniel, the funeral in Tokyo, my family's indifference, and the night I almost died in my home. No one interrupted. When I finished, Ellen simply nodded. "Thank you for trusting us with that. Here we don't measure pain, we share it so it feels lighter." After that first meeting, I realized I wasn't alone. There was someone who lost a child in a car accident, an elderly woman who'd lost her partner of over 50 years, and a young man disowned by his family after coming out. Each story reflected a piece of my own grief, helping me piece together a new image for my life. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Mornings with coffee by the Riverview, afternoons working part-time remotely for my old company, evenings at group meetings or catching up with the few friends who truly cared. My house's transformation came in updates from Mark. New heating system installed, smart controls I could monitor from my phone, slip-resistant kitchen tiles, basement fully waterproofed. A local business even donated a backup generator. Meanwhile, my story was still circulating online. But instead of feeling ashamed as my mother had feared, I felt grateful. Because of it, hands I'd never held had reached out to pull me back from the edge. One afternoon, as I was leaving the hotel for group therapy, the front desk stopped me. On the counter was an envelope marked simply, "For Aurora." Inside was an unsigned card with only one sentence: "Keep going. We're watching over you." I held the card all the way to the community center. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Maybe healing wasn't about going back to who I was, but accepting that I had changed, and using that new part of me to keep living. The day I returned to my fully repaired home, late winter sunlight streamed through the newly installed windows, casting a warm glow over the fresh scent of varnished wood. No more damp stains, no trace of the freezing air that once lingered in every corner. Standing in the kitchen doorway, I took a deep breath, feeling as though I had stepped into a new version of my life, cleaner, stronger, and entirely my own. During my stay at the hotel, I thought a lot about how to keep Daniel's memory alive, not just within me but in others as well. He had once shared his dream of helping young people study and experience life abroad, the same way he went to Japan. So when his life insurance payout arrived, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I contacted our alma mater, met with the administration, and proposed the Daniel Carter International Student Scholarship. It would support American students studying abroad, with additional funding to ensure their families could travel or assist in emergencies. Every clause in that plan was born from the hard lessons I had learned. At the scholarship launch, I invited friends, colleagues, and neighbors who had helped me during the snowstorm. My mother and Ethan didn't come, but my father, Martin, did. He wore an old suit and carried a bouquet of white lilies. After my speech, he approached me quietly. "I know it's too late to fix everything, but if you'll let me, I'd like to start here." I looked at him, seeing no defensiveness this time. His eyes didn't dart away or hide behind small talk. I nodded slightly. "We can try. But things will be different." Since then, we've kept a conditional connection, meeting only in private, usually at a small cafe near Gasworks Park. No mother, no Ethan, no revisiting old fights. We talk about his work, his hiking trips, and sometimes he listens as I talk about Daniel. It isn't perfect, but it's more real than anything we had before. Months later, the scholarship received many applications. I selected a student named Olivia, a 21-year-old linguistics major planning to study regional dialects in South Korea. When I handed her the certificate, she gripped my hand, eyes shining. I promised to honor this opportunity, and I'll always remember Daniel. In that moment, I realized his legacy wasn't in framed photos or keepsakes, but in the impact he left on others' lives. I still get the occasional short message from my mother and Ethan, generic phrases like, "Hope you're well," or "Merry Christmas." I reply politely, but I don't try to bridge the gap. I've stopped expecting them to change. Instead, I focus on relationships that have proven their worth. Mrs. Collins with her weekend cinnamon cookies, Mark who keeps me updated on the house, Ellen and the therapy group where I can talk about Daniel without being told to move on. 1 year after Daniel's passing, I flew back to Tokyo. The March air was crisp, cherry blossoms just beginning to bloom. I brought a bouquet of white lilies and a small card, placing them at his grave. I told him about the scholarship, about Olivia, about how my father and I had started speaking again. I told him I had found a circle of people with no blood ties who still showed up for me, and that I now consider them my family. Leaving the cemetery, I felt a new kind of lightness. Not because the grief had vanished, but because I had learned to live alongside it and turn it into purpose. Daniel once said, "Real family are the ones who stand by you even when they don't have to." Now I understand that fully. And I know the rest of my life will follow that definition. From experiencing loss in a foreign land, being abandoned by her family, and nearly losing her life in a snowstorm, Aurora rose again with the help of compassionate strangers. She rebuilt her life, created a scholarship in her husband's name to support future generations, and maintained selective contact with her father. Aurora's story reminds us that true family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up when we need them most, and that the strength to heal can come from the most unexpected places. What do you think about Aurora's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments and follow the channel so you don't miss other heartfelt, meaningful stories about life and family.